I'm pregnant. What do we do? The message came from my husband's sister-in-law, his brother's wife, while my husband was in the shower. It felt as if my heart had stopped beating altogether. They must have thought I was a naive wife, oblivious to the years of deceit and betrayal I had endured. But they didn't. No. They didn't know that I held in my hands all the evidence of their ugly secrets and their calculated plans. The curtain was about to fall on this hellish charade. My name is Sarah. A moment ago, a message arrived from my husband, Kevin, from his sister-in-law, Emily. I'm pregnant. What do we do? My entire body went cold, but I immediately typed a reply. Come over. Kevin's out right now. Kevin's smartphone had been vibrating insistently on the coffee table. The short, sharp buzzes felt like someone desperately waiting for a response. I was folding a fresh load of laundry, but the light from the screen caught my eye. Before I could smooth out a wrinkle on a shirt, the sender's name was clear. Emily. My sister-in-law. I don't make a habit of snooping through my husband's phone. In our 6 years of tacit marriage, I've always believed that if a person is determined to hide something, you could turn the house upside down and never find it. But this time, for some reason, my heart began to pound with a sickening rhythm. A terrible premonition washed over me, and I gently touched the screen. A short message appeared, and its contents turned my entire body to stone. I'm pregnant, Kevin. What are we going to do? I froze on the spot. Not for a second or two, but for several long seconds, long enough to hear the blood rushing in my ears. My hearing faded, my throat went dry, and the hand holding the phone began to tremble. From the bathroom, the sound of the shower continued its steady rhythm, and I could even hear Kevin humming. It was his carefree habit after a long day at work. The sound, usually so familiar, now pierced my ears like a shrill scream. He had no idea that his world, our world, had just shattered into a million pieces. I swallowed hard and swiped up, my finger scrolling through their previous exchanges. It wasn't just this one message. There were countless conversations I had never seen. I miss you so much, Kevin. I thought about you all night last night. I never should have married someone else. Each word was a sharp needle, stabbing at my eyes. There was no need for speculation, no point in comforting myself with meaningless excuses. It was all brutally, undeniably clear. I thought I would scream. I thought I would run to the bathroom, throw open the door, and confront him with everything. But I didn't. I didn't cry or make a tell to bless scene. In that moment, I was terrifyingly calm. It was the kind of stillness that settles over a person who has lost everything and realizes there is nothing left to lose. I stared at the message I'm pregnant one more time, then slowly, I typed, one letter at a time. Come over. Kevin's out right now. I typed it. Slowly, deliberately, without a single typo. I hesitated for a few seconds before hitting send, but then I pressed it firmly. The message sent instantly. My heart began to race again, but my mind was strangely clear. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want half-hearted denials. I wanted to see the truth with my own eyes. I wanted to catch them in the act, to see the looks on their faces. I placed the phone back on the table, exactly where it had been, as if it had never been touched. Everything had to be the same as it was before I knew. I left no trace. The water in the bathroom was still running. Kevin was still enjoying his private time, blissfully unaware that in a few short minutes, everything would change forever. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. I opened the closet and pulled out a light cardigan. My hands were still shaking, but my movements were surprisingly steady. As I passed the bathroom door with my purse, Kevin called out, "Are you heading out somewhere?" His voice sounded as gentle as ever. "Just running to the store for something," I replied, my voice as natural as I could make it. "I'll be right back." "Okay," he said. "Be safe." The usual kind words. They would have warmed my heart before, but now they felt as cold as ice. I opened the front door, stepped outside, and closed it quietly behind me. As the elevator descended, floor by floor, I saw my reflection in the polished steel doors. My face was the same, but my eyes had changed. They were no longer the eyes of a trusting wife. They were the eyes of a woman ready to face the truth, whatever it might be. I reached the lobby and stepped outside, but I didn't go anywhere. I found a slash on the rationed spot near the entrance, hidden from view, but with a clear line of sight to the condo building's main doors. The evening breeze brushed against my cheek, but I didn't feel the cold. Something inside my chest was constricting, not with a sharp pain, but with the heavy, oppressive feeling of the calm before a storm. I didn't know what I was about to witness, but I knew one thing for certain. Tonight, everything would end. Either they would end, or I would. Standing in the corner of the lobby, looking up at the brightly lit windows of Timus, our building, my mind began to spin. Some things you only recognize when they're shoved right in your face. The truth was, all the signs had been there for a long time. I had simply chosen to cover my eyes and pretend not to see. In that moment, waiting for my sister-in-law, my mind was pulled back 6 years, to my wedding day, a time when I believed I had chosen the right man and the right family. This was my 6th year married to Kevin. 6 years isn't a lifetime, but it's more than enough time for a woman to invest her entire being into a marriage. On the day we got married, everyone told me how lucky I was. Kevin wasn't the type to sweet-talk women or use charming lines, but he had a quiet, reassuring presence, a sincerity and earnestness that put people at ease. He had a stable job, and he wasn't the kind of man to get drunk and violent, lose himself to gambling, or have scandalous affairs. In the eyes of our relatives, Kevin was the ideal husband many women dreamed of. I was simple back then. I believed a woman's happiness didn't come from marrying a rich, smooth-talking man, but from walking alongside a man who knew how to live an honest life. For the first few years, our marriage was, on the surface, truly peaceful. Our home wasn't extravagant, but we were comfortable. We ate breakfast and dinner together, living a life of quiet companionship. Kevin was a porty, SEA, man of few words, but he never embarrassed me in public. At family gatherings, during the holidays, everyone would praise me for having such a good husband. One aunt even joked, "Our Sarah has a good eye for men." Kevin was always so thoughtful, even as a kid. Not like the boys these days. Whenever I heard such words, I would just smile. Back then, I genuinely believed my life would continue to flow so peacefully. The family had one other son, Kevin's younger brother, Ryan. Ryan was more volatile than Kevin. One moment he would be talking normally, and the next, he would fly into a rage, breaking things, or sitting in stony silence for hours. His mother, Susan, always said Ryan had been dealt a bad hand. He was sickly as a child, and the stress of his job as an adult had made him mentally unstable. Because of this, the whole family, while feeling for him, also found him difficult to handle, and always gave in to his demands. It was usually Kevin's job to calm Ryan down after one of his outbursts. This only served to make Kevin look even more responsible and exemplary in everyone's eyes. Then one day, about 3 years ago, there was a big commotion in the family. Ryan brought a woman named Emily home and introduced her as the person he was going to marry. I still remember the day I met her so clearly. Emily was wearing a cream-colored dress, her hair tied in a low ponytail. Her features were delicate, but her gaze was incredibly sharp. She wasn't a simple, sweet country girl. She was a woman who knew she was beautiful and attractive, a woman who could see right through you and discern what you were thinking. The entire family was surprised, not because she wasn't beautiful, but because they couldn't understand why a woman like Emily would choose Ryan. She could have had a much more stable and reliable man, yet she chose him. That day, as I was helping wash fruit in the kitchen, a relative whispered in my ear, "It's strange, isn't it? She doesn't seem like an ordinary girl. Why would she want to marry Ryan?" I just forced a smile and avoided answering, but honestly, I thought it was strange too. Emily didn't seem like the type of woman to sacrifice her life by marrying an unstable man like Ryan without some ulterior motive. At the time, I didn't think too deeply about it. I never imagined that her special reason could be directly related to my husband. On the day of Ryan and Emily's wedding, while people were mingling in the reception hall, I happened to overhear 2 relatives whispering behind me. One spoke in a very low voice, but I heard her clearly. I heard that Emily and Kevin used to date. The other gasped. Really? Then why on earth did she end up marrying the younger brother? Who knows what goes on in other people's families? A chill ran down my spine. When I turned around, they both fell silent and gave me an awkward smile. That night, back at home, I asked Kevin about it directly. He was taking off his watch. When he heard my question, his fingers froze for just a fraction of a second. It was a fleeting moment, but it was long enough for me to realize he died. Wasn't surprised at all. He didn't deny it, or offer a long-winded explanation. He just gave a faint smile and said lightly, "That's all in the past. Don't worry about it." Then he turned his back to me, as if it were a trivial matter. Not even worth my concern. His casual attitude made my throat tighten. If it was really nothing, why couldn't he look me straight in the eye and say it? From that day on, a small thorn lodged itself in my heart. It was the kind of thorn that pricked and ached, a constant, dull pain. I told myself that everyone has a past. What mattered was the present. Emily was Ryan's wife, and Kevin was my husband. We had to live as a family, so the past should be buried. I desperately tried to think this way to protect my own peace of mind. But as time went on, Emily's behavior made it impossible for me to ignore. She was unnaturally close to Kevin. It wasn't the respectful demeanor of a sister-in-law towards her brother-in-law. It was the casual, familiar attitude of two people who had crossed a line long ago. Once, when the whole family was having dinner together, Emily casually placed a bland piece of grilled salmon on Kevin's plate and laughed. "Kevin, you still love the crispy skin, just like you used to." After the words left her mouth, she seemed to realize I was sitting right there and quickly corrected herself. "Oh, I mean, I heard that from Susan a while back." The others might not have noticed, but I did. A slip of the tongue can sometimes speak more truth than 100 excuses. Another time, I saw the two of them talking on the balcony. They weren't laughing or touching. They were just standing there, silently looking at each other. But it was precisely that silence that made me even more uneasy. It wasn't the gaze between a brother-in-law and sister-in-law. It was the deep, heavy gaze of two people who shared a past, who understood each other without words. When I approached, Emily turned away first, and Kevin asked me with a hardened expression, "What are you thinking about now?" I told him their relationship didn't seem normal. He immediately cut me off. "You're being paranoid. Stop making a big deal out of nothing." Those words were repeated countless times after that. Whenever I felt uneasy, he said I was being paranoid. Whenever I questioned him, he told me not to make a paranoid big deal out of it. Gradually, I began to doubt myself. Was I really just being suspicious? Had I created my own unhappiness because I had too good a husband? I wandered in that vicious circle for a long time, until that message appeared before my eyes. And then, everything I had desperately tried to deny finally took a single, clear shape. There was nowhere left to retreat. Since that night, the thorn in my heart was no longer quietly lodged there. It pricked me a little more each day, becoming more vivid, more impossible to ignore. I still went to work, prepared meals, and lived as an ordinary wife, but my heart had already changed. I could no longer see Emily as just a tall sister-in-law, and I could no longer look at Kevin with absolute trust. Once you start doubting, you see traces of it everywhere, no matter how hard you try to forget. Emily started coming to our home more and more frequently. The reasons were always plausible. Ryan had a fit and broke things in their apartment. He had left without a word and wasn't answering his phone. Or she would call late at night, her voice choked with tears, saying, "Kevin, please help me, I'm so scared." Whenever Kevin was home, he would be out the door in an instant. Sometimes, before I could even ask, he'd be putting on his coat and shoes, saying curtly, "Looks like Ryan's acting up again. I'm going to check on it." At first, I tried to believe it was just brotherly concern. But I soon realized that some situations didn't require such immediate, personal intervention. One evening, after 9 p.m., Emily came over again. She didn't pound on the door like someone in a panic, but quietly buzzed the intercom and called out in a low voice, "Kevin? Are you there?" I was in the kitchen at the time. When I heard her voice and came out, she was standing there in a thin house dress, her hair messily tied back. Her face was pale, but her eyes held none of the fear of a frightened person who was genuinely frightened. As soon as Kevin saw her, he pulled her inside and asked quietly, "Did Ryan do Something again? Emily didn't answer in front of me. She glanced at me, and then looked down. It was a brief look, but it was enough to make me uncomfortable. Then, Kevin took her into his home office and closed the door. I stood in the Relais Bravas living room, listening to their conversation. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't so quiet that I couldn't hear. Strangely, Emily's voice, always so demure in front of me, changed completely when she was alone with Kevin. It became lower, sweeter, less like someone asking for help and more like someone being affectionate. This happened more than once. One night, Emily came over and stayed for over an hour. They were in the office, just the two of them. Sometimes the door was slightly ajar. Other times, it was completely closed. Every time I walked past it, a mixture of deep suspicion and humiliation churned inside me. I felt like a stranger in my own home. Once, using the excuse of bringing them water, I opened the door and went in. As soon as I appeared, they stopped talking, and the air in the room became thick with awkwardness. Kevin pretended to be looking at some documents on his desk, while Emily sat with her hands primly in her lap, her mouth shut tight, like someone who had just said something they shouldn't have. That time, I put the glasses down and looked directly at Emily. She looked up, gave a very faint smile, and said in a voice as sweet as honey, "Sarah, please? Don't misunderstand. I just think of Kevin as a real older brother. He's the only one I can rely on here." Her words were polite and considerate, but a chill ran down my spine. Some people's eyes betray more than their words, especially when they feign innocence. Emily told me not to misunderstand, but the way she looked at Kevin was anything but pure. It was the look of someone accustomed to to testing boundaries, to planting one foot in another person's territory. From that point on, I began to watch my husband more carefully. Kevin had never been the type to be attached to his phone. He would leave it on the couch or the table, even when he went to take a shower. But at some point, that completely changed. He took his phone everywhere. He kept it within reach while watching TV, and even took it with him to get a glass of water. Eventually, he started taking it into the bathroom with him. Whenever a message came in, he would quickly check it and then place the phone face down. For a while, he was changing his passcode frequently. Once, when I casually picked up his phone to check the time, he immediately turned and asked, "If you need something, just ask me. Don't touch my phone." The words themselves were ordinary, but his tone made me feel like an intruder. It wasn't the phone, it was his defensiveness. People with nothing to hide don't guard their secrets so fiercely. I didn't argue, I just watched in silence. And in that silence, I began to see more. One night, as we were sleeping, his phone vibrated once, very faintly. But Kevin shot up as if he'd been electrocuted. He snatched the phone almost reflexively and turned his back to me. When I asked who it was at this hour, he answered curtly, "It's from work." He said it was work, but his voice was anything but calm. He was tense, and I could see his hand gripping the phone tightly. The faint blue light from the screen illuminated his face. Even without seeing the content, I knew it wasn't an ordinary message. If it were really from work, he wouldn't have reacted like a thief caught in the act. From then on, my suspicion was no longer a vague feeling. I started paying attention to our finances. We had always managed our own bank accounts, but we were aware of each other's major expenses. I wasn't the type of wife to interfere with my husband's spending, nor did I have a habit of prying into his personal finances. But gradually, he started making excuses about being short on money. One time, he said he needed cash for a business venture. Another time, he said he had loaned money to a friend. Once, at the end of the month, while checking our joint account history for an Everwalk insurance payment, I saw a particular name appear repeatedly. Emily. Not just once, but many times. Transfers of $2,000, $5,000, and once, even $10,000. The transfers were frequent, and the amounts were too large to be considered simple gifts. I stared at the screen for a long time, my head feeling cold and my heart empty. That evening after dinner, I waited for Kevin to finish his meal and then I asked him, very calmly, why he was sending Emily so much money. What was wrong? That she needed to ask her brother-in-law for help so often? Kevin, who was drinking water, froze, and then slammed the glass down on the table. He immediately raised his voice. She's family, Sarah. She was in trouble, so I helped her. Why do you have to be so cheap? I was speechless. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't because I thought it was a waste. It was his attitude shouting at me to defend her. It was the way he dismissed my legitimate question as me being small-minded. In that very moment, I realized a fact I had desperately tried to ignore. Kevin and Emily's relationship had long crossed the line of family. And what hurt me the most wasn't the money or the conversations behind closed doors. It was the fact that my husband so naturally, so instinctively, took her side. As if she were the one who needed to be comforted and protected in this story, not me. After Kevin yelled at me for questioning the money he sent to Emily, I didn't ask again. Not because I believed him, but because I had realized something. Clearly, when a person is determined to hide something, the more you press them, the more thoroughly they hide it. Some truths cannot be drawn out with tears or arguments. To see them, you can only watch, silently and patiently. And heaven, it seems, did not abandon a person who was finally coming to their senses. One weekend afternoon, Kevin was home, and I was on the balcony hanging laundry. I went back into the living room to grab a towel I had forgotten. As I passed by our bedroom window, I heard Emily's voice from the balcony of the adjacent building. We lived in the same condo complex, and the distance between buildings wasn't so great that you couldn't hear voices if it was quiet. At first, I paid no mind, but then I heard her voice clearly and stopped in my tracks. It wasn't her usual sweet, feigned innocence. It was a voice laced with anger, resentment, and even malice. Emily was speaking quickly, as if spewing out words she had held back for years. I told you, if it wasn't for Kevin, I never would have married Ryan. Do you think I have that kind of time on my hands? Who would want to spend their life with a mentally unstable person like that? My whole body froze. The towel in my hand felt cold. I couldn't even breathe properly, standing there in the shadows, perfectly still. Emily's voice continued, each word like a knife stripping away the false skin she had worn for so long. The sound of the wind and cars passing by meant I couldn't catch every word, but that one sentence. If it wasn't for Kevin, I never would have married Ryan was enough to give shape to all my suspicions. It was no longer a woman's paranoid intuition. It was a dirty, humiliating truth. I wanted to run over there, slap her face, and demand an explanation for everything, but I didn't move. Perhaps because I had suppressed so much for so long, instead of becoming hysterical, my mind became strangely cold. It was in that moment I realized I could no longer live in this deception. I would either expose the truth to this very end or live my life being made a fool of by them. That night, I said nothing to Kevin. I acted like an ordinary wife, preparing dinner and asking if he wanted another bowl of soup. But in my mind, the scattered pieces of the past were fitting together, one by one. Ryan and Emily's wedding, the whispers of the relatives that day, Kevin's momentary hesitation when I asked about their past. At the time, it had just been unsettling, but now I understood. That hesitation wasn't from surprise. It was because I had hit a dubious nerve, a place he didn't want touched. Quietly, without anyone noticing, I began to dig into my husband's past again. I called one of our older relatives and, under the guise of reminiscing, casually brought up Kevin's life before we were married. The relative initially tried to change the subject, but after a few exchanges, she finally confessed. Before Kevin married me, he had been deeply in love with a woman, so much so that the whole family thought they would get married, but they had suddenly broken up. When I asked who the woman was, there was a few seconds of silence on the other end, and then the answer came back in a very small voice. It was Emily, of course. Who else would it be? I had already suspected it in my heart, but hearing it confirmed by someone else felt like having a bucket of ice water thrown over me. What I had tried so hard to deny was true. They weren't just acquaintances or people who had a crush on each other. They had been in a serious relationship, one so deep the entire family knew about it. After that phone call, I sat stunned for a long time. The fan in front of me was still turning, and the food on the stove was still warm. Everything was as calm as if nothing had happened, but my heart was no longer calm. From that moment on, I began to see everything from a different perspective, and the more I saw, the more my skin crawled. Emily didn't marry Ryan because she loved him or because she had accepted her fate. She married him to stay in this family, to plant her feet in the very house where the man she was targeting lived. The person she wanted to be close to wasn't her own husband, but Kevin. The thought gave me goosebumps. A woman who would marry the brother of the man she loved, who would bide her time every day, looking for a way into his life. That emotion was no longer love. It was obsession, a possessive, sticky, and dirty scheme. But what drove me further into despair was the fact that Kevin hadn't cut off the relationship. If he had been firm, if he had truly wanted to protect his own family, Emily could not have carried on this charade for so long on her own. His indecisiveness, his protectiveness of her, the money he sent in secret, the closed doors, the meaningful glances, all of it showed that their relationship had never ended. I decided I would no longer live as a fool. From that day on, I began to gather evidence. Not to slap them or make a scene like women in dramas. It was to keep my sanity. I recorded the times Emily came to the house, organized the history of the money Kevin sent her, and took pictures of the moments he hastily flipped his phone over when a message came in. I even started leaving my smartphone in the living room bookshelf with the voice recorder on. I thought that if I could record their casual words, I could break free from the loop of thinking I was just being paranoid. After much deliberation, I installed a very small camera in the corner of a 7-foot decorative shelf in the living room. My hands trembled as I did it. It was a truly miserable thing to do. What wife wants to turn her own home into a trap to catch her husband and sister-in-law in an affair? But I had no other choice. I knew well that to win, I couldn't rely on emotions alone. I needed something clear, cold, and undeniable. And all the quiet preparations I had been making finally led to that message tonight. I'm pregnant, Kevin. What are we going to do? This message was no longer a sudden blow. It was the final nail in the coffin, closing the door on all excuses. When I considered everything I had heard, tracked, and pieced together myself, this message was the most definitive proof that Kevin and Emily's relationship had crossed the line long ago. And this time, I would never give them the chance to say, "You're just being paranoid." The message had been sent, and the evidence was undeniably laid out. But every minute that passed in the lobby felt like a long winter afternoon, crawling by at a snail's pace. I hid in the shadow of a pillar near the glass doors, my eyes fixed on the plaza in front of the condo. People came and went as usual. A few motorcycles passed by, a delivery driver rushed into an elevator. The sound of sound, children laughing from the nearby park was the same as ever. Only I felt that all the time in this space was moving slowly, that the air was so thick it was hard to breathe. It was then I realized that waiting for the truth to be revealed is more painful than suspecting it. If suspicion is like being slowly cut with a knife, this waiting was like clearly seeing someone approach you with a knife and being unable to move. I wasn't looking at my watch, but I was counting the time in my head. 5 minutes, 7, 10. I had no way of knowing where Emily was, what she was thinking, whether she was scared or excited. Maybe there was only one thought in her head: she had to rush to the man she believed was waiting for her. The thought alone made my throat clench. About 15 minutes later, a silver taxi pulled into the main entrance and stopped in front of the lobby steps. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. The car door opened, and out stepped Emily. She wasn't dressed neatly, like she was visiting relatives, nor did she look like the gentle daughter-in-law she usually pretended to be. She had a windbreaker thrown carelessly over a silver dress, and her hair, tied in a low ponytail, was messy. Her face was pale, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. She clutched a handbag in one hand, while the other rested unconsciously on her stomach. Her steps were hurried and unsteady. Just seeing her, I knew I hadn't been wrong. If Kevin hadn't been the one to send that message, if there was truly nothing between them, Emily would not have rushed over like this. She didn't call to confirm, she didn't hesitate, she didn't even think to wait a little longer. She was sure it was Kevin who had sent the message, and that certainty was the dagger that pierced my chest. Emily paid the taxi driver and practically ran into the lobby. She was looking down, walking so fast that she almost bumped into a woman holding a child. She didn't offer a proper apology, just mumbled something and quickly turned away. I stayed hidden, clutching the strap of my purse so tightly my knuckles hurt. I wanted to step out in front of her right then and there, to confront her. Do you have any shame? But I held myself back. Not yet. Emily pressed the elevator button. I followed a step behind, heading for the SAL elevator next to hers. Our building had 2 elevators facing each other, and at DS. That time of night, there was no one else around, so it wasn't difficult to follow her without being seen. The doors opened, and she got in first. I stood in the corner of the adjacent elevator, watching her reflection in the digital display. The numbers climbed one by one. 3rd floor, 5th, 7th. With each floor, my chest grew heavier. When the elevator doors opened on our floor, Emily practically leaped out. I followed a few steps behind, careful to make no sound with my shoes. The hallway was eerily quiet, the white fluorescent lights overhead illuminating the taster gleaming tile floor. Emily paused for a moment in front of our door. She didn't ring the doorbell or knock. She raised her hand and punched in a code. I froze. Beep. 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 The sound was small, but to me, it was the sound of something in my head shattering. The security code to our home. This wasn't the family home where everyone lived together. It was our private space, just for the 2 of us. And yet, Emily had just punched in the code and opened the door without a hint of hesitation, with a practiced ease. It meant she had known the code for a long time, that this was not the first or second time I had let herself in. The door opened, and Emily slipped inside, closing it gently behind her. As if she were very used to not making a sound. I hid right next to the door. I could hear her voice from inside. It was trembling, but not so quiet that I couldn't make it out. Kevin? I'm here. At those words, I closed my eyes for a moment. There was no way to deceive myself any longer. No amount of your being paranoid could save them now. Everything was laid bare in the cruelest way. Inside, there was a moment of suffocating silence, and then I heard the sound of slippers shuffling on the floor. Kevin must have just gotten out of the shower. I could picture the scene vividly. His wet hair, a t-shirt not yet properly put on, and the familiar scent of the body wash I had bought him, a scent I had smelled every night for years. And then, just as I expected, the air inside the apartment froze. There was no happy greeting, no pretense of surprise. Just a very brief but palpable silence, one that I could feel even from outside. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were facing each other. A look that said everything without a word, a look so familiar that if one showed up unannounced, the other would instantly know why. That silence was more definitive proof than 100 confessions. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. It swung open slowly. The living room was bright, and a few drops of water, fallen from someone's hair, dotted the floor. Emily was standing near the sofa, her face ashen, her hand still clutching the bag in front of her stomach. Kevin stood a few feet away from her. His hair was indeed wet, a towel slung over his shoulder. They both turned to look at me at the same time. I walked inside, placed my purse on a chair, and looked straight at the 2 of them. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, my voice didn't even tremble. I said just one sentence, so slowly and coldly that I felt like a stranger to myself. Go on. Don't mind me. The air in the room froze solid. Emily's lips trembled, but she couldn't say a word. Kevin's eyes widened as if he were being choked, and after a moment of stunned silence, he finally managed to squeeze out a single question. Sarah? Why are you back so soon? In that exact moment, I knew that all the masks had finally been torn away. After Kevin uttered those words, a suffocating silence once again enveloped the room. I looked at my husband, then at Emily. The old me probably would have burst into tears, desperately asking, what did I ever do to deserve this? But at this moment, all the pain inside me had already passed the noisy stage. It had all settled, crystallized into something terrifyingly sharp. I took another step inside, my eyes fixed on Emily. Her face was drained of color, and she was gripping the strap of her purse so tightly it looked like she, too, would collapse if she let go. I spoke, each word hard as a stone. Say it. Whose baby is that? Emily's lips moved, and she blinked several times, like someone desperately searching for a plausible lie to save herself. But before she could speak, Kevin cut in. He took a step forward, as if to instinctively place himself between me and her. "Sarah, just calm down. It's not what you think." Hearing that, I couldn't help but let out a short, sharp laugh, a laugh so bitter. It felt like I could taste it on my tongue. "Not what I think?" I repeated his words, looking him straight in the eye. "So, what is it?" "The two of you standing in our home, her calling you Kevin instead of my name, letting herself in with our security code like she owns the place. Is this some kind of play? You're rehearsing?" Kevin froze. The color in his face quickly shifted from pale to angry. I could see him desperately trying to concoct a story to get out of this filthy situation. The more I looked at him, the more disgusted I felt. To think I had lived with this man for years, a man who, even when caught red-handed, could still say, "It's not what you think." Just then, Emily suddenly dropped to her knees. She collapsed onto the living room floor, sobbing, large tears rolling down her cheeks. "Sarah. Sarah. Please listen to me. I'm so sorry." I was taken aback for a moment, not out of pity, but because of how quickly she fell to her knees, how expertly she began to cry. As if she were used to using tears as a shortcut. I looked down at her for a few seconds. Emily was undeniably beautiful, she could make her voice sound sweet, and she possessed a persicum fragility that could weaken a man's resolve. But looking closely now, her tears were not those of repentance. They were the tears of someone who had been cornered. I said coldly, "What are you sorry for?" "For not meaning to." "You didn't mean to send my husband a message saying you're pregnant? You didn't mean to come running here the moment you got a reply? You didn't mean to know the security code to our home? Do you think I'm an idiot?" Emily clutched her stomach and sobbed even louder. "I really didn't think it would come to this. I never wanted this." "You never wanted this?" I cut through her words like a knife. "You never wanted to climb into my husband's bed? You never wanted to do this behind my back? Aren't you ashamed to even say those words?" Perhaps my icy tone made Kevin lose his composure. He yelled, his voice becoming low and rough. "Sarah, watch your mouth." "Watch my mouth?" I turned to him. Those 3 words were like gasoline poured on the fire that had been smoldering in my heart for years. I took another step closer to him, so close I could see the water droplets falling from his wet hair. "Watch my mouth?" I said, putting force into every syllable. "You're the one who cheated on your wife with your sister-in-law. You're the one who brought your mistress into my home. You're the one who's been making a fool of me for years. And now you're telling me I'm the one who needs to watch my mouth?" Kevin opened his mouth, but no words came out. I didn't give him an inch. I pointed at Emily and glared at him. "If you want to defend her so badly, then just be honest. That baby she's carrying, it's yours, isn't it?" As soon as the question was out, it felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Emily didn't dare to look up, and Kevin stood rooted to the spot. His eyes flickered wildly once, and he turned his face away, avoiding my gaze. It was a brief moment, but it was more certain than any confession. If he were innocent, he would have furiously denied it, pounded the table, and rained down insults on me. But he was silent. A cowardly, dirty, guilty silence. My vision blurred, but my heart felt as cold as ice. In the end, it wasn't the BS suspicion that killed me. It was the confirmation. Emily suddenly started crying even louder. She curled into a ball, one hand on her stomach, the other on the floor. "I didn't want this to happen, I really didn't," she sobbed, her voice choked and trembling. But I just couldn't give Kevin up." I held my breath. I just couldn't give Kevin up. That one sentence, echoing amidst the scent of my husband's body wash and the disgusting scene I was witnessing, proved everything. There was no need for a DNA test, no need for any more messages. With that one sentence, their relationship was completely exposed. I looked at Emily, and I looked at Kevin. One was kneeling at my feet, crying and playing the victim. The other was standing before me, his posture stiff, his gaze already lost. Suddenly, a dry laugh escaped my lips. My 6 years of tribalist marriage had, in the end, been shattered by these 2 people standing in my living room. One, a shameless woman who would marry her ex-lover's brother just to stay near him. The other, a cowardly man who committed adultery while playing the part of a good husband every day. I took a very slow breath, and then let out a low, cold sentence that made them both flinch. "So, you've finally shown me. What a fool I've been." Just as I said it, a loud bang came from outside the front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a violent sound, as if someone was about to break the door down. Kevin, and Emily all spun around in shock. And in the next moment, Ryan was standing in the doorway. His face was flushed red, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was panting as if he had run all the way here, unleashing all the anger and hatred he had suppressed for so long. The moment Emily saw her husband, her face turned even whiter. She reflexively took a step back, clutching her stomach even tighter. Kevin froze completely, the panic on his face now impossible to hide. Before I could even process why Ryan was here at this exact moment, he spoke, grinding his teeth. He spat out each word as if chewing on it. "I knew everything. Did you two really think you could fool me forever?" That one sentence was like a stone thrown into a taut surface of water, sending ripples through everything in the room. It wasn't just that Ryan had shown up. It was that his tone was completely different from the unstable, foolish persona the family had described for years. There was no dazed look, no foolishness, no meaningless anger. Standing before me was a frighteningly sane Ryan. Kevin was the first to react, but his reaction wasn't one of joy or normal surprise at his brother's arrival. His face was pale, and his voice was hoarse. "Ryan, what are you doing here?" Ryan snorted. A short, dry laugh filled with mockery. He took a few steps inside. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound like a lock being thrown, cutting off all escape routes for the three of us left in the room. "What am I doing here?" Ryan looked straight at Kevin. "I came to see how long you two were going to continue this disgusting play." Emily, sobbing, took a step forward. Her voice trembled. "Ryan, stop it. Please. Just listen to me." But Ryan didn't even glance at his wife. His gaze was fixed on Kevin, as if the man in front of him was no longer his brother, but a mortal enemy. Then, suddenly, Ryan pulled a folded stack of papers from a manila envelope and slammed them onto the coffee table. The papers fanned out, sliding across the Dauv glass surface and stopping right in front of me. I reflexively looked down at them. At the top of the first page, the name of a Forest maternity clinic was printed in bold letters. Below it were details of the test, pregnancy records, and case numbers. And then, in the conclusion section, my eyes locked on a number that felt like it would shatter my skull. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. I don't remember if I was breathing at that moment. I just felt my entire body turn to ice. I had known it in my heart, I had seen it, I had heard it, I had pieced together all the dirty fragments, but seeing it laid out in black ink on white paper, as a cold, emotionless conclusion, felt like being hit in the chest with a hammer. The child was really Kevin's. This was no longer a matter of life, suspicion, or a marital squabble. It was a tangible, undeniable fact. Kevin rushed forward, his face contorted. "Who told you to do this?" he shouted. His voice a mix of fury and rage. "Where did you get the sample? Who put you up to this?" Ryan looked at his brother, and the corner of his mouth lifted into a pained, bitter smile. "Did you really think I was that stupid?" Ryan said, his voice eerily clear. "Just because I had a few episodes, you thought I'd be a mental patient dancing in the palm of your hands for the rest of my life? I was acting crazy to see just how long you two would keep up the act." Emily collapsed onto the sofa as if all her strength had left her, and she began to wail. "No, Ryan. Don't say that." She stammered, then suddenly shot up, and ran to her husband. She grabbed his arm with both hands, pleading as if trying to protect something. "I know I was wrong, but please listen to my explanation. It's not what you think." Ryan violently shook her off. Emily stumbled, almost falling. His voice wasn't loud, but it was terrifyingly cold. "If it's not what I think, then what is it? Did you not marry me just so you could get into my brother's bed?" The question was like a knife that stripped away her last layer of pretense. Emily's eyes widened, and she shook her head, still crying. But her gesture looked so weak, so meaningless. I didn't mean to," she whispered. Hearing that, I let out a dry laugh. Even now, all she could cling to was I didn't mean to. As if all the betrayal, lies, and schemes could be washed away. With a few tears. Kevin stepped forward, trying to de-escalate the situation, but Ryan turned on him. Ryan's gaze was no longer that of a younger brother looking at his older brother. It was the look of a man who had been stabbed in the back by the person he trusted most. "And you, brother," Ryan said, chewing on every word. "You're my older brother. You are the one who taught me to protect my family, to take care of our mother, to cherish my wife. And you slept with my wife. Brother. Are you even human?" Kevin opened his mouth, but no words came out. It was the first time I had ever seen him look so pathetic. The man who had so coolly told me to watch my mouth, who had said I was being paranoid, was now standing before his wife and brother, with a face that held nothing but humiliation and guilt. I didn't intervene anymore. From the moment Ryan walked into this room, I knew. The long-running play between Kevin and Emily was beyond repair. The masks were being torn off right in front of me, so quickly that they didn't even have time to hide. And in the midst of this chaos, I realized one thing clearly: no one would ever be able to pretend this didn't happen. I thought this was everything. A cheating husband, a sister-in-law pregnant with her brother-in-law's child, a brother who feigned madness to spy on his wife. These facts alone were dirty and ugly enough to destroy a family from the roots up. But Ryan, his eyes still bloodshot, turned to me with an eerily calm voice. "Sarah," he said, "do you think this child is a product of love?" He snorted, the corner of his mouth twitching painfully. "No. This was a plan." I froze. It wasn't just me. Even Kevin stared at his brother in shock, and Emily's face visibly paled. She took a step forward, her voice hoarse. "Ryan. Stop it." But Ryan didn't stop. Perhaps all the resentment and humiliation he had suppressed for so long no longer allowed him to care about saving anyone's face. He stared at Emily, each word landing like a lead weight. "Are you scared? Why? Why don't you let me continue? Or is it because if Sarah finds out everything, your and brother's little plan will be ruined?" A chill ran down my spine. A plan. It was only then, amidst the pain of betrayal, that I realized I had still been too naive. I had only been thinking about a past romance, a physical affair, a secret relationship. But Ryan's gaze told me that something far filthier was hidden behind that child. Ryan turned back to me. His voice lowered, but every word was crystal clear. "Sarah, you remember that this condo is in your name, right?" I stared at him, my throat completely dry. "I remember. How could I forget?" Ryan snorted. "That's what she was after from the very beginning." Emily screamed, a sharp, knife-like sound. "That's a lie." But Ryan no longer even looked at his wife. He looked only at me, as if trying to pull me out of the final shock. "Think about it. Why has she been so obsessed with this place for the past few years? Why did she keep pushing Kevin to sort out the house issues, the paperwork issues? Why did her eyes light up every time our mother brought up the topic of inheritance?" I stood frozen to the spot. Some things seem ordinary when you're living through them, but when someone else pieces the fragments together for you later, they take on a sinister shape. Come to think of it, Kevin had casually mentioned changing the condo's title to me several times. He said it would be more convenient for getting a loan if it were in his name, or that it would be less complicated later if we had it as joint property. When I refused once, he even got angry, saying I was calculating and didn't care about him. At the time, I just thought it was a matter of pride, of him wanting to be the head of the Taff household. I didn't agree, but I didn't suspect anything deeper. This condo was an inheritance my late parents had left me, the one thing I would never let go of. I thought my caution had been enough, but I had no idea it was preventing a satyr's trap they had been setting for a long time. I turned to look at Kevin. He was standing there with a face drained of all color. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. For the first time, I saw not just panic on his face, but something like dawning comprehension. Ryan continued, his voice growing sharper. "She was going to use that child to force Kevin to divorce you. She thought that while you were reeling from the divorce, she and my mother could work on you, somehow convince you, and take this house." As I listened to his words, my body grew colder and colder. Each syllable completely stripped away the pretense of, "I didn't mean to that." Emily had clung to so desperately. She didn't just want Kevin. She wanted my place, my home, my entire life. Suddenly, Emily started to laugh. She wasn't crying anymore, nor was she collapsed on the floor, feigning fragility. She stood up straight and wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her disheveled hair hung around her face. Her expression was twisted and harsh, and the gentle, polite sister-in-law was nowhere to be seen. "So, what if I did?" she said, almost screaming. "So what?" The room fell silent for a moment. Emily whipped her head around to face me. Her eyes were red and bloodshot, and each word erupted like a volcano of long-suppressed anger. "Am I not allowed to love him? Am I not allowed to feel wronged? What do you have that I don't? If it weren't for you, I would have been the one to marry him." I stared at her without blinking. In this moment, there was no pitiful woman who had lost her way due to a mistake. There was only a monster, consumed by jealousy and greed, shameless and evil. Emily pointed a finger at my face, her voice trembling with rage. "What do you have that I don't? You just got lucky. Your parents left you a house, so you get to sit here smugly as the rightful wife. And what about me? I had to live with a mentally unstable man, seeing the man I love every day without even being able to touch him. Why should I have to endure that?" I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles hurt. "So you married his brother, stayed close, slept with him behind my back, got pregnant, and tried to take my house too? And you see yourself as the victim in all this?" Emily bit her lip, her eyes burning with fury. "At least I lived for what I wanted. You just hold on to what belongs to someone else and think you've won." As soon as those words were out, Kevin seemed to snap back to reality. He whipped his head around, his voice hoarse. "Emily, what are you saying? Did you get close to me from the start just for this house?" Emily faltered for a second. Perhaps, cornered, she hadn't even realized what she was saying. But it was only for a moment. She lifted the corner of her mouth again and snorted. A pained but defiant smile. "And what was I supposed to expect from you? A man who lives with his wife for 6 years while secretly meeting his ex-girlfriend? How was I supposed to trust you? Did you think I was stupid enough to tie myself down to this mess without this house as a safety net?" The words were like a slap across Kevin's face. I saw him take a step back. His eyes were wide, and he had a dazed expression, like a man whose final illusion had just been shattered. He had probably deluded himself into thinking he was reclaiming an old love, that Emily was enduring everything for the sake of that love. But in the end, he realized that even that love was just part of the trap. I stood still, watching the two of them. One had betrayed me, and the other had tried to steal my entire life. And now, in this living room, they were tearing off each other's ugly masks themselves. It was only then that I realized Emily's child wasn't just the result of an affair. It was a bargaining chip, a hook, and the final stage of a long-prepared scheme. And the most painful irony was that I wasn't just betrayed. The betrayal was far more calculated and deeper than I could have ever imagined. I was silent for a few seconds. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the entire situation unfolding before me was so filthy and grotesque that I was afraid I would burst out laughing. The man who betrayed his wife realized at the seminar last moment that he was just a pawn. The woman who trampled on morality to insert herself into another's family was now being turned away by the very man she had clung to. And I, who had been deceived for years, was ultimately the prosyntax, most sane person in this mess. I lifted my head and suddenly clapped my hands. Once. And then again. The dry, sharp sound echoed in the eerily quiet living room. I looked at each of their faces in turn, and said, in a calm, cold voice that felt like it belonged to a stranger, "Bravo. A truly grand performance that's been running for years. It's just a shame that tonight's the closing night." Emily, who was panting, whipped her head around at my words. Her eyes were still red, but she no longer looked fragile. Kevin stood as if nailed to the spot, his arms hanging limply at his sides like a man whose every mask had been stripped away. I looked at him for a long time. The man who had slept in the same bed as me, eaten with me every day, sat in this very living room and lectured me about family, responsibility, and trust. But all of it, in the end, was nothing but a Hollow shell. I took another step closer to him, close enough to reach out and touch him. You betrayed me for her, I said, each word slow and clear. Do you have any regret? Kevin blinked rapidly. His lips trembled, and after a moment, he finally managed to stammer out a few words. I didn't know Emily was thinking all that. I laughed. It wasn't the bitter laugh from before. It was an ice-cold laugh. You didn't know? I asked, my eyes locked on his. Or did you not want to know? You slept with her, you lied to me, you sent her money, you let her come and go from this house like it was her own. I don't even need to know what promises you made her. But even now, you're going to say you didn't know? Do you really think I can believe a single word you say anymore? Kevin was speechless. I could see sweat beading on his temples. The air conditioning was still running, but the mature, composed demeanor he used to use to shut down my suspicions was gone. In front of me was just a coward, desperately clinging to his last excuse. Emily couldn't stand it. She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Kevin, and screamed, her voice almost a shriek. Kevin, say something. You love me, right? You told me you never forgot about me. She screamed. Say something. That one sentence sent another tremor through the room. I looked straight at Kevin. In this moment, if he had defended her like he had done before, I might to have felt less disgusted. At least that would have been his true self. But he remained silent. Not only was he silent, he instinctively took a small step back, as if trying to distance himself from Emily. That single step was all it took. Emily's face completely contorted. I saw the flash of shock, humiliation, and then rage in her eyes. Ryan, who was standing nearby, let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a laugh devoid of any joy, filled only with derision and bitterness. He crossed his arms and looked at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. See? Ryan said. His voice hoarse, but sharp. You were just a fling. When money and property come into play, what do you think you look like in his eyes? Emily stared at her husband, then back at Kevin. Her hands were clenched so tightly, her knuckles were white. No, she shook her head repeatedly. This can't be happening. I can't lose. Her voice started as a tremble, and ended in a scream. After all the years I've endured by your side. Do you know how much I put up with? I'm carrying your child. You can't just turn your back on me like this. She lunged forward, trying to grab Kevin's arm, but he flinched away. The evasion was like a knife stabbing into Emily's last shred of pride. She stood frozen, her hair a mess, her face streaked with tears, her eyes burning with rage. In that moment, I knew she had completely lost her mind. And it was then that I thought, enough. I didn't want to hear any more excuses, nor did I want to watch them tear each other apart with their filthy emotions. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. All three of them looked at me at once. Very slowly, with an icy calm, I unlocked the screen and opened a pre-prepared folder. The first thing was screenshots of the sweet messages Emily had sent Kevin. Next was the history of the bank transfers. Then, a short audio file I had recorded in the living room. In the file, Emily's voice was low and intimate, completely different from her usual tone, and Kevin's voice was gentle in a way I hadn't heard in years. Finally, I played the video from the small camera I had placed on the shelf. The screen clearly showed Emily letting herself into the house. When I wasn't there, the two of them standing intimately close in the living room. The silent glances and charged atmosphere that I had been told were just me being paranoid. Ryan clenched his jaw. Emily stared at the screen as if watching her own sentencing and took a step back. Kevin looked like he could barely stand. Even without seeing any more, I knew he had realized one thing clearly. From this moment on, nothing could be undone. I turned off the screen, holding the phone in my hand, and looked up at each of WS. Them. My voice was very slow and clear, not loud, but carrying a weight that no one could interrupt. This should be enough to end everything. As I finished speaking, the storm that had been raging inside me when I was in the lobby was gone. All that remained was a vast, cold calm. And in that calm, I knew with absolute certainty that this marriage, this false family, and all their dirty betrayals had now reached a point of no return. After I spoke, the room fell silent again. It was the heavy silence that comes after all pretense has been stripped away, when no one has the energy left to Offer even one more excuse. I stood straight, glanced at the three people before me, and then walked slowly to a small cabinet next to my desk. In the bottom drawer was something I had put there a few days ago, on a night when my suspicions had grown so large I couldn't sleep. I took out a stack of papers, walked back to the table, and placed them in front of Kevin. The document on top was a divorce petition. I had prepared everything that afternoon for this exact moment, a moment I knew with certainty would come. I placed the papers down lightly, but even the sound of paper touching the glass table made Emily flinch. Kevin stared at the documents as if looking at something terrifying. I spoke, my voice not loud, but each word hammered a nail into the floor of the living room. Sign it. No further explanation is necessary. Kevin's head snapped up to look at me. In his eyes, instead of the defensive excuses from moments ago, there was a very real fear. Perhaps it was only now, with the divorce papers on the table, that he could finally believe that everything had truly reached an irreversible point. Sarah, his voice was hoarse. Please, just calm down. Give me a chance to explain. I cut him off before he could finish. A chance? I gave you plenty of chances. Over the last 6 years. Kevin froze. I held his gaze, without a shred of lingering affection. For 6 years, I lived as your wife. I trusted you, and I endured. When you told me I was being paranoid, when you told me not to make a big deal out of it, when you said she was just your sister-in-law, I listened to it all. If those 6 years, those countless moments, weren't chances, then how many more chances did you want me to give you? Until you brought your mistress into my home, until she got pregnant and lorded it over me? Would that have finally been enough? Kevin's lips moved, but in the end, he said nothing. In this moment, he had no words left. Everything had rotted from the core. I turned my head to face Emily. She was standing near the sofa, her hands cradling her stomach. Her face was pale, her eyes still red, but her expression had changed. The defiant look was gone, as was the tearful victim act. In the face of the truth, in the face of the divorce papers on the table, she seemed to have finally realized that the long-running play she had orchestrated had reached an irreversible conclusion. I looked her up and down, and said, very slowly, and you? That child you're carrying, whether you keep it or not, has nothing to do with me anymore. Don't look at me as if I have some obligation to pity you. You're the one who put yourself in this situation, not me. Emily bit her lip hard, and fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. But this time, it didn't disgust me. I was just tired. Tired of the kind of people who do shameless things and then expect the world to look at them with pity. Ryan, who had been leaning back in his chair, let out a short, sharp snort at my words. Did you think you won? He asked, looking at his wife. His eyes were filled with nothing but coldness. You have nothing left. The words were like a final blow to Emily. I could see her shoulders tremble. The woman who had deluded herself into thinking she had secured her ex-lover, a child, and even this house, now stood abandoned in the middle of the living room, with nowhere to lean. Kevin had turned his back on her, Ryan had torn off her mask, and I had put down the divorce papers. The place she had so desperately wanted to occupy had, in the end, been destroyed by my hand in a different way, not by me leaving in defeat, but by me taking control and cutting them both out of my life. I picked up a set of keys from a hook by the door, the keys to the front door, the parking garage gate, and the entry card to the building that Kevin used every day. I placed the keys firmly in front of him. The sound of metal hitting the glass table was sharp and cold. And then I said, starting today, you and she are to get out. Kevin stared at me in disbelief. He looked at the keys, then at me, his eyes wide. Sarah, are you throwing me out? I looked him straight in the eye. A few months ago, that one question would have shattered my heart. But not now. I was, to my own surprise, at peace. No, I answered. I'm not throwing you out. I'm just putting you back where you belong. He blinked, not understanding. I said, each word distinct, not raising my voice, but making it sharp enough to pierce him. An outsider. As that one word landed, Kevin's face turned ashen. Perhaps it was only then that he realized the biggest thing he had lost wasn't the house or the marriage. It was that, from this moment on, in my eyes, he was no longer a husband, no longer family, no longer even a part of my life. Just an outsider. An outsider. Who had come into this house, ruined everything, and now had to leave. Emily froze on the spot, and Ryan turned his face away, his jaw tight as if he were trying to swallow something large. And with that final word, I didn't wait any longer. I walked to the bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began to pack another's few essential clothes and important documents. I didn't make a scene, I didn't throw things, I didn't scream insults. In this moment, I no longer needed noise to prove my pain. Silence was what made this house the most terrifying. From the living room, I could still hear their breathing. The sound of someone shifting in a chair, Emily's soft sobs, and Kevin's voice calling my name. Quietly, but not daring to come in. All the sounds mingled together, confused, suffocating, pathetic. But I didn't look back. I knew with absolute clarity that, from this moment on, that living room was no longer a space of false happiness. It was just a place where all lies had been completely exposed. And I was the only one who would finally walk out of it with my sanity intact. I was pulling some personal papers from a drawer when a loud crash came from the living room. It wasn't a voice or normal footsteps. It was the sound of a chair being shoved and paper being violently torn. I whipped my head around to see Emily snatching the divorce papers from the table in front of Kevin. It all happened in an instant. She clutched the papers in her fist, and with bloodshot eyes and disheveled hair, she stood in the middle of the living room and ripped them to shreds. The sound of tearing paper, rip, 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 was dry and eerie. White scraps of paper fluttered to the floor. Emily, panting heavily, lifted her head and stared at me. Her voice was shrill, all traces of her usual gentle femininity gone. "Did you think you won? This isn't over." I stood in the bedroom doorway, still holding a file, and watched the scene unfold quietly. Perhaps Emily thought that by tearing up a few pieces of paper, she could tear up my resolve. But what chilled me wasn't her impulsive action. It was the fact that, even now, in my house, she believed she had the right to declare war on me. Just then, Kevin seemed to snap back to his senses and shouted, his voice a mix of anger and panic, "Emily, stop it." But the more he tried to stop her, the more frantic she became. She turned on him. The tears hadn't even dried on her face, but it was twisted with rage and hatred. "Are you scared now? You weren't scared when you were in my bed, were you? You weren't scared when you held me and promised you'd divorce her soon and marry me?" The words were a bomb detonating in the middle of the living room. I had already seen and heard the filthiest things, but hearing it so raw from Emily's own mouth sent another shockwave through the house. Kevin's face turned white, and he looked like a light push would send him toppling over. Ryan clenched his fist so hard the veins in his neck bulged. And I just stood there, watching how their masks were being torn off by their own hands. Emily laughed while crying, the laugh of a cornered animal determined to leave no one with an escape route. She reached into her handbag, pulled out her smartphone, and held it up in front of us like a knife. "You think this is the end?" she snorted. "I have everything. Voice recordings, messages, pictures. What you said to me, what you promised. You might forget, but I haven't." Then she looked straight at Kevin, her voice firm, each word like a bullet hitting his face. "If I can't live peacefully today, don't think anyone in this house will be able to hold their head up high." Kevin, as if on fire, lunged forward and shouted, "Give that to me." But Emily scrambled back, clutching the phone to her chest. They grappled next to the black table, one trying to take it, the other trying to protect it. The sounds of panting, feet scuffling against a chair, and things being knocked over filled the air. Just as I took a step forward, there was a loud clatter, and the phone fell to the floor. It skidded across the tile and came to a stop near the leg of the sofa. The screen was still lit up. Perhaps even fate wanted me to see everything to the very end. In that moment, on the unlocked screen, a gallery of photos and messages was clearly visible. Messages calling him Kevin, arranging to meet at hotels, saying things like, "Just wait a little longer, and I wanted you so badly today." And one picture, taken in bed. Kevin was asleep with his eyes closed, the sheets were rumpled, and Emily's hand was resting on his chest. It didn't take a close look to know this wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a long-running, shameless affair. The moment Ryan saw that screen, he transformed, as if gasoline had been poured all over him. He violently kicked a dining chair. It crashed to the floor with a perceptible, loud bang. Ryan screamed, his voice hoarse. "You steal my wife and then have the nerve to ask for a chance here?" The rage in his eyes was no longer an act or suppressed. It was the pure humiliation of a man trampled on by his own brother and wife at the same time. I thought Ryan was going to lunge at Kevin right then and there. Honestly, I wouldn't have been surprised if he had. But he stopped. He stood there, his chest heaving, panting for breath, and then suddenly, he turned to me. His face twisted into a smile more bitter than tears. "Sarah, do you see now?" His voice was ragged. "In their eyes, you and I were just the background. You were just a prop for that man to play the part of a good husband. And I was just a living stepping stone for that woman to get into this house." His words, strangely, cut deep into my chest. They were so accurate I couldn't even argue. The two of us, seemingly unconnected, had in the end been cast in the same role. The people to be used so that others could complete their dirty little love story. Just as the air in the room felt like it was about to boil over, a frantic knocking came from the front door. It wasn't a normal knock, it was fast and hard, as if the person outside was truly panicked. Before anyone could react, the door opened, and Susan, Kevin and Ryan's mother, walked in. She froze in the doorway, taking in the scene. The overturned chair, the scraps of paper on the floor, the faces of her sons, one pale, one flushed red. The air was thick with sweat, tears, and humiliation. Before Susan could even process the situation, she opened her mouth to ask what on earth was going on. Just then, Emily ran to her. She clung to Susan's legs, collapsing to her knees as if grabbing the last life raft in a raging river, and wailed, "Mother, please help me." She lifted her tear-streaked face and screamed loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Mother, I'm carrying your family's bloodline." As those words ended, the air in the house grew even tighter. The already suffocating atmosphere thickened to the point that even I felt my chest constrict. I watched Susan's face to see how it would change. And in that moment, I had a premonition that from now on, this would no longer be a problem confined to the four of us in this room. After Emily's cry of "I'm carrying your family's bloodline," Susan stood frozen. For a few seconds, I saw her expression shift clearly. Shock and bewilderment, followed by an incredibly quick, calculating look. And what sent a chill through my entire body was that, a few seconds later, instead of slapping Emily or yelling at her son, she whipped her head around to face me. Her eyes burned with anger, and she spoke through clenched teeth, her voice sharp and venomous, as if spitting in my face. "I knew this would happen. It's because of women like you, who can't even manage a husband." I was rooted to the spot. Not out of shock, but because the sheer audacity of it was beyond anything I could have imagined. Her son had cheated with his sister-in-law and gotten her pregnant. The entire sordid truth was laid bare in my home. And yet, the first person she aimed her blame at was me. Kevin hung his head low, unable to look anyone in the eye. Ryan, standing next to him, suddenly started laughing like a madman. It was a dry, twisted laugh, more terrifying than a scream. He shook his head and looked at his own mother with pity. Incredible. Like mother, like son. Susan, as if her younger son didn't even exist, helped Emily to her feet and pulled her behind her, as if Emily were the one who needed protecting, not me. The one who had been betrayed in my own home. Her voice lowered, which only made her calculating nature more apparent. "This child is our bloodline. No matter what, this must be resolved quietly. We absolutely cannot let this become a scandal. Cannot let this become a scandal." Hearing those words, a dry laugh escaped my lips, and the back of my nose stung. In the end, the most terrifying thing in Susan's mind wasn't the fact that her eldest son had an affair with his sister-in-law, nor that her family was rotten to the core. It was just the fear of gossip. The fear of losing face, of what people would say, of the facade of a respectable family being torn away. I looked at Susan and asked slowly, placing each word on the table like a Brescian tease. "Wait. So, you knew about this before, didn't you?" At that question, the room fell completely silent. Emily trembled faintly behind Susan. Kevin snapped his head up to look at his mother, and Ryan narrowed his eyes, his lips twisting. And Susan, I saw her flinch. Her grip on Emily's arm tightened. But it was only for a moment. She immediately lifted her chin again, her face returning to its characteristic audacity. "So what if I did?" she said. Her voice hard. "Men make mistakes sometimes. A wife's job is to cover for him. And keep the family together, not air our dirty laundry for the whole neighborhood to see and bring shame upon us." Hearing her words, my hands went cold. Ryan looked like he was about to truly lose his mind. He slammed the paternity test results back down on the table. "Mother, you call my brother sleeping with my wife a mistake?" Ryan's eyes were bloodshot, and he bit out every word. "Or is it just easy for you to say that because you're not the one who was cheated on?" Susan glared at him. "You, shut your mouth right now. This is a conversation for adults." "Adults?" Ryan snorted. "Which adults?" "The ones who whisper to their daughter-in-law to use her baby, to get her brother-in-law to divorce his wife, and steal their house?" As soon as those words were out, Susan froze solid. I looked straight at her face. There was no need for speculation anymore. The way she defended Emily, her attitude of wanting to quietly resolve things, her lack of surprise while mentioning our bloodline, all of it confirmed that this woman hadn't just known, she was directly involved. I said nothing more. I picked up the remote control and turned on the television, mounted on the wall. All eyes turned to me. As the screen lit up, it reflected the pale faces of everyone in the room. I opened the video folder from the small camera I had installed on the shelf and played a file from a specific date. At first, the familiar living room appeared on the screen. The afternoon sun, the table, the sofa. And then, a few seconds later, Susan appeared on screen. Sitting across from her was Emily. They were speaking in very low voices, but the camera's microphone picked up every word. "Don't you dare let that child go. Once Kevin divorces Sarah, this house will be yours soon enough." Susan's voice echoed, crystal clear, in the deathly silent living room. Undeniable, word for word. It felt as if all the air in the room had stopped moving. I heard Emily gasp, and Kevin took a step back. Susan's face went from red to ghostly white. She moved her lips, staring at the screen in disbelief. Emily's face was ashen. Perhaps it was only then, terrified, that she realized how ugly the whole scheme, packaged as Susan's love, looked under the bright lights of this living room. Susan stammered, her previous sharp tone gone. I was just angry, I didn't mean it." I turned off the television and looked straight at her. Each word was as heavy as a stone. "So it wasn't just an affair. It was a play, with you directing from behind the scenes." Susan opened her mouth, but no words came out. The dignified image she had used to control me for years had been shattered. It was only then that Kevin seemed to come to his senses and looked at his mother. His eyes were filled with bewilderment, as if a son was seeing a completely different side of the mother he had trusted his whole life. His voice trembled. "Mom, did you use me too?" Susan whipped around to face her eldest son. Cornered, she could no longer maintain her false composure. "Who do you think I did this for? It was all for this family. For your future." As those words burst out, the room froze completely. No one needed an N/% explanation anymore. She had essentially confessed everything herself. It wasn't because she loved her son, or to cover up his mistakes, or to protect the family. It was simply for this house for greed, packaged under the name of property. I looked at the woman in front of me, and felt that my years of endurance had not been in vain. If I had lost my sanity today, if I hadn't kept the evidence, if I hadn't waited for them to tear off their own masks, I would have had to live my whole life under a woman like that, believing that all her evil deeds were for the sake of the family. But I was wrong. Now I saw clearly. In the family, they so loudly proclaimed, there had never been a place for me from the start. Once Susan said those words, I knew that this matter could no longer be resolved quietly, within these four walls. Ugly things like this, the more you try to hide them, the more you give them an opportunity to twist the story, the more you try to cover them up, the more they find a way to escape. I put down the remote, picked up my smartphone, and made a short call to a lawyer who had been a friend of my late father. "Mr. Henderson, I need you to come to my house right now. I need a witness." After a moment of silence, a short "I'm on my way" came back. After hanging up, I opened the family group chat. The one where we pretended to be a close-knit family, asking after each other on holidays. Without hesitation, I quickly typed, "Everyone, please come to my house tonight. There's something we need to clear up once and for all." As soon as I sent the message, the read receipts began to appear. The living room grew even colder. Susan, realizing my intention, rushed towards me. Are you out of your mind?" She tried to snatch the phone from my hand. I sidestepped her and firmly pushed her hand away. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was a resolute action that even she was taken aback by. I looked her straight in the talpanas eye, and said, coldly and clearly, "You want to resolve this quietly, don't you? I'm sorry, but dirty things like this only get repeated if they aren't dragged out into the light." Emily collapsed into a chair, and Kevin pleaded in a low voice, "Sarah, please, don't make this a bigger deal. If other people find out." I cut him off immediately. "Other people? After living as your wife for 6 years, it's only today that I've clearly understood who the real other people are." Within an hour, the intercom buzzed repeatedly. Relatives began to arrive, one by one, with tense expressions. Some were in their pajamas, others had clearly rushed from their dinner tables. Soon, the living room was filled with people. Without any preamble, I stood in the middle of the living room. In front of me were Susan, Kevin, Emily, and Ryan. Behind me stood all the relatives. "I didn't call you all here tonight to shame anyone. I just don't want to be misunderstood later, as the one who made a big deal out of nothing or went against the family." After I finished speaking, I turned on the TV and played the saved footage in order. The scene of Emily letting herself in with the code, the two of them standing closely in the living room, the loving messages, the audio recordings. And finally, the footage of my mother-in-law coaching Emily to push for a fighty divorce and aim for the house. The buzzing living room fell silent in an instant. After the videos ended, sighs, gasps, and whispers erupted from all corners. One aunt slapped her thigh and said, "My God, a mother-in-law scheming to steal her daughter-in-law's house." An uncle flushed with anger and muttered, "The shame of the family." All eyes were on Susan, Kevin, and Emily. Just as Kevin, unable to bear it any longer, tried to step forward, I held up my hand. "You be quiet. I've heard enough from you for the past 6 years. Tonight, it's everyone else's turn to row. See you." His face turned a sickly gray. At that moment, Ryan took a thick stack of papers from the envelope he had brought and threw them on the table. "Since everyone's gathered, you might as well see my brother's true face too." It was a collection of bank statements, loan agreements, and debt documents, all in Kevin's name. For the past few years, he's been saying it's for business capital, but the truth is, he's been racking up debt to support that woman. The room buzzed with chatter again. A relative picked up a document and stammered, $80,000. Just then, Kevin's smartphone rang like crazy. He was so flustered that he accidentally hit the speakerphone button, and a rough, intimidating man's voice boomed throughout the living room. "This is your last warning. If you don't have that 80 grand by this weekend, we're coming to your office. Don't even think about running." The room froze completely. No more evidence was needed. That one phone call shattered even the last shred of Kevin's reputation. I looked at him. The man who had pretended to be so respectable was now branded a debt-ridden, cheating fraudster in front of all his relatives. I took a deep breath and delivered my final words. "From this day forward, Kevin is no longer my husband. And to those who tried to use me as a stepping stone to get what you want," I looked at Susan and Emily in turn, "I'm sorry, but that stepping stone is now broken." No one could answer. Only the heavy silence of a family shattered by the truth filled the space. Instead of pain, I felt a cold peace. I had finally, with my own hands, dragged them all into the light. No one would ever be able to twist this story to their liking again. That night, after all the masks were torn away, the situation unraveled far more quickly than I had anticipated. Some things seem solid when they are hidden, but once a crack appears, they crumble from the roof to the foundation all at once. The next morning, shortly after I arrived at work, my phone began ringing incessantly. It was Kevin. I finally answered on the 6th call. His voice was hoarse, all traces of his former authoritative demeanor gone. "Sarah, a complaint was filed at my company. The pictures, the debt documents, everything. You did this, didn't you? I was silent for a moment, then answered. Do you think I have that kind of time? You lived your life that way, it's only natural that someone would file a complaint. He suddenly started begging. Please, withdraw the complaint. If I get fired, I'm finished. I said coldly, it's not me who's finishing you. It's your betrayal and your betrayal. Greed. And I hung up. That afternoon, he actually showed up at my office building. He looked like he had aged 10 years overnight. He ran towards me as soon as he saw me, but was stopped by building security. He shouted from a distance, Sarah, please, don't be so cold. We can work this out between us, as husband and wife. I turned to him and let out a dry laugh. Between us? When you were cheating with your sister-in-law and planning with your mother to steal my house, did you? I think that was something we should work out. Are you only scared now because you're about to lose your job? It's too late. He froze on the spot. I turned my back on him without another look. Emily fared no better. Her family heard the news and came up from their small town. Her mother, who had believed her daughter was living a life of sacrifice, slapped her across the face in our living room and broke down crying, according Sevenis to a relative. How could you do this? You've shamed our entire family. I heard that Emily, having lost all her support and pregnant, had a complete mental breakdown. Ryan was different. After the initial shock, he became even more clear-headed. He immediately filed for divorce. When a relative advised him to be the bigger man and forgive her, he apparently laughed coldly and said just one thing. Being a fool once is enough. And Susan, the arrogant woman who had tried to manipulate me, now found it difficult to even go to the local supermarket. She couldn't stand the whispers of people behind her back. The reputation she had tried to protect her whole life had, in the end, been shattered by her own greed. One day, she came to see me and tearfully pleaded, aren't we still family, after all this? But I said firmly, Susan, the moment you planned to take my house, we were no longer family. A few days later, Kevin was fired from his job. The creditors continued to hound him. Cornered, he tried to blame everything on Emily, but she reportedly spat back. Weren't you the one who promised to divorce her and marry me? The two, who had once acted as if they couldn't live without each other, were now at each other's throats more fiercely than enemies. Watching all of this from a distance, I realized something. Some people don't feel remorse. They only feel pain when they lose everything: money, honor, everything. And that pain isn't repentance, it's just despair over the fact that they are paying the price. A month later, the divorce was finalized. Kevin left with almost nothing. Not because I was cruel, but because that house had never been his to begin with. I was the inheritance my parents had left me, the foundation of my life that I had fought to protect. The day I had the locks changed, I watched the old lock being removed with mixed feelings. It wasn't a sense of victory or glee. It was just the feeling of finally having the courage to replace a door that had been broken. For a long time, I cleaned out the house. I packed up his things, the items filled with our memories, into boxes. The house felt spacious now that I was alone, but also empty. But that emptiness was no longer suffocating. I realized that honest solitude was far better than living in the same space as a traitor, pretending to be at peace. Ryan moved to another state to seek professional counseling. Before he left, he said to me, in the end, you were the most sane one in this family. I just nodded in response. It wasn't that I was more sane, it was that I had been pushed into a corner where I could no longer afford to pretend. I heard that Emily, after a huge fight with Kevin, had a stress-induced premature birth. The baby survived, but had to be in an incubator for a long time. When I heard the news, I was silent for a moment. An innocent life was suffering because of the greed and mistakes of adults. Perhaps the biggest victim in this story wasn't me, who was betrayed, or them, who lost everything, but that very baby, born into this dirty world without understanding any of it. Susan fell ill from the successive shocks. Some people told me I should find it in my heart to forgive her for old time's sake, but I just remained silent. Some wounds, even when they heal, leave scars. You can forgive, but you can't forget. One afternoon, Kevin came to see me again. In just a month, he looked like a completely different person. He hesitated outside the door for a while, then spoke, his voice pained. If only. If only I had known when to stop back. Then. I looked at him, the man who was once my husband, now a stranger. I answered. Quietly. The most unfortunate thing isn't that you were wrong. It's that you were wrong so many times, for so long, and you never once tried to stop. He hung his head. I said nothing more and quietly closed the door. For some people, life itself serves as the harshest form of retribution. I returned to my ordinary life. I eat alone, I clean the house on weekends, I sit by the window and feel the sun on my face. I've realized that the most painful moment for a woman isn't when she's betrayed, but when she realizes she has endured for far too long for a worthless person. But if you have the courage to realize that truth and walk away, it's never too late. My story didn't end in a painful act of revenge. It concluded with a deep, quiet peace. I lost my marriage, my husband, and the years I had invested. But in return, I protected my self-respect, my home, and most importantly, myself. I had almost been broken in their ugly play, but in the end, I was the one who walked away on my own 2 feet, with my dignity intact.